Now, Rousseau argues, all that is necessary is for men not to seek the kind of ends which conflict with the ends of others. Why do they now seek such ends? Because they are corrupt, because they are not rational, because they are not natural. And this concept of nature in Rousseau, although in certain respects like the concept of nature in other thinkers, nevertheless acquires a certain tone of its own. Rousseau is sure that he knows what it is to be a natural man, and for him to be natural is to be good. And if all men were natural, they would all be good, and what they would then seek would be something which would make each and all of them satisfied together. Let me quote from him again. As long as several men in the assembly regard themselves as a single body, they have only a single will. The constant willing of all the members of the state is the general will. The body politic is a moral being possessed of a will. This general will is something penetrates into a man's innermost being and concerns itself with his will no less than with his actions. What is this general will? Who are these men in the assembly? How is it that they generate something which can be called a single will which holds for them all? Well, Rousseau's answer is that if, just as all men who argue rationally reach the truth about other matters of fact, and these truths are always compatible, so men in the same condition of nature, that is to say, unperverted, uncorrupted, not pulled at by selfish interests, not pulled at by regional or sectional interests, not enslaved by fear or by unworthy hopes, men not bullied, not twisted out of their proper nature by the wickedness of other men. Men in that condition must want that which, if it is obtained, will be equally good for all other men as good as they are. And therefore, so long as we somehow or other recapture what is to him the original innocent state of nature, in which men were not yet prey to the many passions, to the many wicked and evil impulses which civilization has bred in the human breast. So if only we could recapture that, natural harmony, happiness, and goodness would once more be the lot of human society. His notion of what is a natural man is, of course, something which is to some degree affected by the kind of man he was. Rousseau was a petit bourgeois from Geneva who lived in early life, the life of a tramp, and who was at odds with the society of his time, and was the prey of what nowadays are called psychological inferiorities of many kinds. Consequently, his notion of a natural man is the exact opposite of the kind of persons whom he particularly detested, disliked, and disliked. He denounces, therefore, not merely the rich, not merely the powerful. There are few moralists who don't regard these two classes as the natural enemies of society. He denounces, and he is almost the first to denounce, a very different set of persons, and by this means deeply affected the European consciousness of the next century. He detests the arts and he detests the sciences. He dislikes every form of sophistication, every form of refinement, every form of fastidiousness. He is really the first person quite explicitly and quite openly to say that the good man is not merely simple, not merely poor, for these are sentiments which many a Christian thinker has held. He goes further than that. He thinks the rough is better than the smooth. He thinks the disturbed is better than the tranquil. Rousseau is a man who suffers from deep resentments of cliques, of coteries, of sets. He suffers from a deep resentment of intellectuals, of persons who have the pride of cleverness, of persons who in some way are experts or specialists who set themselves up over the heads of the people. All those 19th century thinkers who are violently anti-intellectual and in a sense anti-cultural, all the great militant Philistines of that century are really the natural descendants of Rousseau. Rousseau's tormented and tortured nature made him look with eyes of hatred upon people like Diderot, D'Alembert, Helvetius in Paris, who were to him fastidious, sophisticated, artificial persons, incapable of understanding all those dark emotions, all those deep and torturing feelings which ravage the heart of a true natural man. The natural man for him was somebody who had a deep wisdom, very different from the corrupt sophistication of the towns. He is the first militant lowbrow of history. And people like Carlyle and to some extent Nietzsche, certainly Lawrence, D.H. Lawrence, and petty bourgeois dictators like Hitler and Mussolini are natural descendants of Rousseau. It's difficult to classify this as a right-wing or a left-wing phenomenon. It is mainly a kind of petty bourgeois revolt against a society from which the exile feels excluded, a kind of common cause with the outcasts, the rebels, the free, wild artist. That is what makes Rousseau the founder of Romanticism and wild individualism, as well as the founder of so many other movements of the 19th century, of socialism and communism, of authoritarianism, of democratic liberalism, of almost every single strand, except what might be called fastidious love of culture in these 2 centuries which followed publication of the social contract. And because Rousseau hates intellectuals, hates persons who detach themselves from life, hates specialists, hates people who lock themselves up into some kind of special coterie, who detach themselves from life, because he feels that the heart ought to be opened, that the simple peasant sitting under the ancestral oak has a deeper vision of what life is like and what nature is like and what conduct ought to be than the buttoned up, priggish, fastidious, sophisticated highbrow who lives in the city. Because he feels all that, he founds a tradition which then spreads over Europe, which then spreads to the United States, which is really the foundation of that celebrated concept called the American way of life, in accordance with which the simple people of the country possess a deeper sense of reality and a deeper virtue and a deeper understanding of moral values than the professors of the universities or the politicians of the cities or other people who have somehow become denatured, who have somehow cut themselves off from the deep inner stream which is at once life, morality, wisdom. That is the kind of impression which Rousseau communicates when he talks about nature. And although there are at least 60 senses of the word nature in the 18th century, his is, in a certain sense, unique. He goes further than anybody in identifying nature with, not merely with simplicity, but with hostility to civilized, elaborate, sophisticated, artistic, or scientific values. It isn't artists and it isn't scientists who must guide society. That is why he dislikes Helvetius and the encyclopedists so acutely. It must be the man who is in touch with the truth, and the man who is in touch with the truth is somebody who allows the divine grace, who allows the truth which nature alone possesses to pour into his heart. And this may be done only in the bosom of nature, only if you live the simple life. At first, the simple life in Rousseau is merely a description of the kind of conditions in which the true answer may be vouchsafed. Gradually it becomes that truth itself. It becomes difficult to distinguish both in Émile and the Nouvelle Héloïse between the conditions for knowing the answer to questions and the answers themselves. For Rousseau, ultimately, it is being a certain kind of person. It is having one's heart in the right place. It's having a certain character and not possessing certain knowledge, knowing certain propositions to be true, which is the key to all the problems. In theory, he goes on like any other 18th century philosophe and says we must employ our reason, and he uses deductive reasoning, sometimes very cogent, sometimes very lucid and extremely well expressed deductive reasoning for reaching his conclusions. But really what happens is that this deductive reasoning is like a straitjacket of logic which he claps upon the inner burning lunatic vision within. And it is this extraordinary combination of the inner lunatic vision with the cold, rigorous straitjacket of a kind of Calvinistic logic which really lends his prose its powerful enchantment and its hypnotic effect. You appear to be reading logical argument which distinguishes in concepts, and draws conclusions in a valid manner from premises, while all the time something very violent is being said to you. A vision is being, as it were, expressed to you. Somebody is trying to dominate you by means of a very coherent, although very, often very lunatic vision of life, and not really arguing in the cool and collected way in which he appears to be talking. The inner vision, as I say, is this mysterious concept of the coincidence of authority and liberty. And the coincidence derives from the fact that in order to make men at once free and capable of living with each other in society and capable of obeying the moral law, what you want is for men to want that which the moral law in fact enjoins. In short, the problem is something of this kind. You at once want to give people unlimited liberty because otherwise they cease to be men. And yet you want them to live according to the rules. Well, if they love the rules, then they will want the rules, not because the rules are rules, as because they love them. If your problem is, how shall a man be at once free and yet in chains? Then you say, well, but if the chains are not imposed upon him, if the chains are not something with which he's bound by some external force, if the chains are something which he chooses himself because it is an expression of his nature, if the chains are something which he generates from within him as an inner ideal, if it is what he above all wants in the world, then the chains aren't chains. A man who is self-chained is not a prisoner. And so Rousseau ultimately says, man is everywhere born free, and yet he's everywhere in chains. Well, what sort of chains? If they're the chains of convention, if they're the chains of the tyrant, if they're the chains of other people who want to use you for their own ends, then of course these are chains, and you must fight and you must struggle, and nothing must stand in the way of the great battle for individual self-assertion and freedom. But if the chains are chains of your own making, if the chains are simply the rules which you, with your own inner reason, or because of the grace which pours in while you lead the simple life, or because of the voice of conscience, or the voice of God, or the voice of nature, which are all referred to by Rousseau as if they were almost the same thing, if the chains are simply rules, the very obedience to which is the most freest, strongest, most spontaneous expression of your own inner nature, then the chains no longer bind you. Self-control is not control. Self-control is freedom. And so Rousseau gradually progresses towards this peculiar idea that what is wanted is men who want to be connected with each other in the way in which the state connects them. The original chains are some form of coercion which the tyrant used to employ in order to force you to do his will. And it is this which poets have been so wickedly crowned with our garlands. It is this which writers have so fulsomely and so immorally tried to conceal by the encomia which they have paid to mere force, to mere authority. But what is wanted is something very different. What is wanted, I quote Rousseau again, is the surrender of each individual with all his rights to the whole community. If you surrender yourself to the whole community, then how can you not be free? For who coerces you? Not X, not Y, not this man, not that man, not this institution, not that institution. It is the state which coerces you. But what is the state? The state is you and others such as you, all seeking your common good. And there is for Rousseau a common good. For if there were not something which is the common good of the whole society, which doesn't conflict with individual goods, if there weren't such a thing, then the question, how shall we live, what shall we do, what shall we, a group of men together, do, would become meaningless. And that cannot possibly be allowed.